Hello, my name is Gabriel Cordero, and I'm making this video because for the last near 6 months, I've been trying to raise awareness over the legal battle that I'm attempting to fight on behalf of my grandmother. She unfortunately was the victim of elder financial abuse. I'll be going into more detail, but while I am attempting to raise awareness, I'm also trying to gain funds, support, and donations for the GoFundMe that I opened that would go towards her legal fees. So I'm happy to say that while I have been trying to get the word out over what has happened, I have reached out to a number of news networks and podcasters, one of which was generous enough to donate their time to me for a sit down. He goes by Diego Mayo, is who will be conducting this interview, and he is from Latino Spirit. So, in addition to that, he was kind enough to find a studio for us to have this interview with. So, I wanted to take the time, because it is in Spanish, to give my reaction to the video as well as serve as the phone operator. You can select one for English. So I'll be translating the contents of this interview.
Buenas noches a todos y bienvenidos. Estamos con Diego F. Mayo, un programa de Latino Spirit y también de East Coast Latino Public Media en conjunto con CNJ Network.
So this is the host whom I mentioned, Diego Mayo. He's just introducing himself, as well as the studio that was kind enough to offer us their services, not just the studio, but in the editing process.
Donde vamos a compartir historias que informan, inspiran y protegen a nuestra comunidad. Esta noche trataremos dos temas súper importantes. Primero, hablaremos sobre la protección de nuestros mayores, un problema grave de muchas familias que enfrentan, pero del que pocas personas hablan públicamente.
So he's discussing the topic that he and I will be talking about, which will be elder financial abuse, that, as he mentions, unfortunately, many families endure and have to confront, but very few people talk about it openly, especially in a public forum.
Después nos acompañará la alcaldesa de Penns Grove, Ladina Londo, quien compartirá su historia como autora y líder comunitaria y cómo su libro está llegando a las familias de habla hispana. Si lo ves en directo, puedes publicar tus preguntas en los comentarios y las personas que estamos entrevistando te pueden responder.
So he was just discussing the topic and the guest that he will be doing the second interview. Obviously, I'm just here to speak on my sit down with him.
Empecemos. Nuestro primer invitado hoy es Gabriel Cordero, quien está luchando por proteger a su abuela Gladys Pérez.
So he introduces me, explains why I am at the studio having a sit down with him in order to protect my grandmother from a crime that had befallen her.
Gladys tiene 86 años y padece demencia.
He mentions her age of 86 and her affliction with dementia.
Después de la muerte de su hija durante la pandemia de COVID, quedó en una situación muy vulnerable.
So after the death of my aunt, my grandmother's daughter, who passed away from COVID during the pandemic, my grandmother found herself in a vulnerable position.
Su familia cree que fue víctima de abuso y explotación financiera.
So the fear amongst the family was that those who had taken my grandmother in under a false flag of devotion and loyalty had exploited her financially to exploit the vulnerable state of mind that she was in and exploit her financially.
Mientras se encontraba en esa condición, Gabriel ha estado luchando por años para recuperar sus derechos y a la misma vez proteger su futuro.
He mentions my fight for many years, 5 to be exact, where I've been fighting for my grandmother's rights as well as to protect her future financially.
Gabriel, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros.
Gracias por tenerme e invitarme aquí.
Ok, vamos a iniciar esta entrevista con algo muy importante porque debemos establecer la historia. Cuéntanos quién es Gladys Pérez.
So, introduction, I thank him for this opportunity. I thank him for the time, taking the time to sit with me. And before getting into the details of my legal battle, he wanted to stress and establish who my grandmother is. I mean, obviously, she's a relative of mine, but he really wanted to get out to the public a sense of who this woman was, what she means to my family, what she means to me, and really establish the type of person that she is, just for that human connection, for that warmth.
Pues una mujer que siempre se ha dedicado a su familia. Ella vino a este país con su hermana para que el próximo generación puedan tener un futuro.
I mentioned how my grandmother was always just someone who prioritized family to such a degree. And you have to understand that she comes from a time, a generation where all you really had was family. You didn't have all these diversions of social media, for instance, and a lot of the distractions that we deal with nowadays. So it wasn't just that family was so core to her, but she and her sisters attempted to inculcate that into the next generation. They came to this country working low-end jobs, but came here with the hope and the promise of providing for their families, working in factories, so that the next generation would have opportunities that they didn't.
Ellos, aquí en el país de oportunidad, ella trabajaba en fábrica y siempre hizo lo que pudo por su familia. Siempre tuvo reuniones para su familia y la hermana de ella jugando bingo. Ella le encanta.
I misspoke. I said bingo, but the reunions were such a big deal, even as children. And as much as the aunts and my grandmother would always have these get-togethers at whoever's house, it could be my grandmother, one of the sisters, the party was for everybody else. The table was reserved for dominoes, and no one was allowed to interrupt. Many of the younger ones didn't understand that because we figured, hey, they play with our toys, we should get to play with theirs. But no, it didn't take long for it to be understood that the table was reserved for the dominoes and just the sisters.
Los nenes de la familia siempre uno pudo notar una sonrisa y que su corazón hasta se elevó por estar alrededor de su familia.
It was such a point of pride for my grandmother and her sisters, for each of them to be surrounded by the kids. I mean, they went out of their way to put smiles on the faces of all of their grandchildren, all the children that were at these gatherings. And it genuinely elevated their spirits. Because again, family was so core to them, family and the church. So they didn't have much, but when they had these reunions, the laughter, the memories that they would share was something truly heartwarming. And it brought such a smile to their faces, and you could really tell.
Y siempre cuando ella vino por la Navidad, la día especial o el cumpleaños, siempre uno pudo notar que ella puso una sonrisa para ella y ella vino con la meta a hacer cualquier miembro de la familia reír, contarnos historias de Puerto Rico.
Uh, the memories that they would share was almost like TV. It was almost like watching Saturday morning cartoons. And even if you didn't, if you weren't old enough to get the context of the joke, even if you weren't as fluent as everybody else was in Spanish, it was hysterical hearing everybody else laugh. Like, and that was, you don't really appreciate it as a kid, but as an adult, just the ambiance, you really miss that. And I'm gonna share one of my grandmother's stories here. That's why you have that look on my face.
Fíjate, ella nació en una isla y nunca aprendió a nadar.
My grandmother lived on an island. You're surrounded by water. Never learned how to swim. I still make fun of her about that today.
Wow. Pero entonces ella era el núcleo. ¿Qué recuerdas tienes de tu infancia con ella?
So he mentions how my grandmother was such a core, a nucleus to the family. And he asks me, what are my earliest memories of her?
Ella fue mi primer memoria como un bebé. Yo me recuerdo que me estaba cuidando y ella dijo que ella quiso, ella es mi madrina, so ella quiso tenerme en los brazos de ella.
My grandmother's my very first memory. I distinctly remember in 8th grade, we were asked to share what our first memory was. And I mentioned that I was in my crib and my grandmother wanted to crawl into the crib with me. This tiny 4'12" woman wanted to crawl into the crib with me. And all of this, 2 of her sisters were trying to hold her back. Oh, stop being dumb. She's like, no. That's my grandson. But it's memories like that, just things like that have really kept me going and reminded me who and what I'm fighting for.
Claro. ¿Y qué tipo de vida construyó ella para su familia?
So he asks, what type of life did she nurture for her family?
Para todo, ya que ella era ese núcleo.
Pues la importancia de ser organizado, que no dejar que cualquier diferencia de opinión va a causar división en la familia.
So my grandmother really pushed for us, and me and my sibling fought very often when I was younger, but my grandmother attempted to get across to us the importance of just unity, organization, not holding grudges, just the importance of coming together and what family ought to be and ought to mean. Whenever me and my sibling would argue, it was always the lecture of that's not how family should be. And again, these are the things that are an inconvenience when you're a child, but you really grow to appreciate the importance of that when you grow up, because there have to be values that actually matter in your life. There has to be things that are important to you. And I believe that as a child, you don't really grasp it, but slowly but surely those words like seep into you as you grow older and start to, become the person who inevitably you will become. And as you grow into your adulthood and you grow your identity, you establish yourself. If you're as fortunate as I am to have had those types of influences in your life, you can carry that torch on.
Y vemos hoy que, hay tanto método para uno distraerse, música, película, que sea, pero ella siempre mantuvo ese principal en nosotros, esa moralidad, necesidad para la familia mantenerse
Unidos.
Yeah, so I reiterate the point that I mentioned earlier about we have so many distractions nowadays. Movies, music, social media, obviously. But it wasn't like that back in the day for someone like my grandmother, where it was family and church. And there are so many distractions today, some of which I'm culpable for, social media and the like, YouTube, what have you. But sometimes you need some of that old school charm from, the old country, just to hold on to some part of your culture, just to continue those values, because those values are worth it. And you find that to be the case the older that you get, and you find yourself once the younger kids start coming into the fold, and you're now the elder statesman, those things really do begin to matter. You don't think about your sneakers anymore or that new phone that you bought, but really those memories. And it can take a while, but for those principles, those virtues to really seep in and for you to find the value in them. But without people like my grandmother, I can't say that I would genuinely have that big of an appreciation for family.
Ahora, después de la muerte de tu tía durante el COVID, tu abuela quedó en una posición muy vulnerable.
Sí.
¿Nos puedes explicar qué ocurrió durante ese periodo?
So here's where we're getting into the main topic of this one-on-one interview, the entire purpose for my channel, this video, and my fight for the last half decade.
Sí, un miembro de la familia dijo o dio una promesa falsa, que iba a cuidar a mi abuela, que iba a asegurar que ella iba a estar seguro y dejar que ella iba a vivir con él.
So here's where the false promise was given by a member of the family, capitalizing on the chaos that was going on when my aunt passed away, where you get someone who comes with all the right words and the best of intentions and really hiding what it was that they had intended. And when my suspicions, when they basically revealed what it is that they were doing, and if any suspicions were had beforehand, they were confirmed after the lid was blown off.
Y él me mandó un mensaje por video y me dijo que mi abuela quiso tener la tarjeta de crédito, la llave de la casa, la llave del carro de mi tití que murió, la hija de ella. Y yo encontré todo eso raro.
So, on a video call with my grandmother, this particular relative had basically revealed what it was that they were up to, telling me that my grandmother allegedly had been worried about my aunt's, her dead daughter's credit cards and her birth certificate and her passport and house keys and car keys. My grandmother was handicapped, and you're telling me that these are the things that would have been on her mind right after, fresh off of losing her daughter. This minutia, credit cards, is what would have been on her mind, and on her mind for days and days.
Que conociendo mi abuela, ella no estaba preocupada en eso, recién que su hija murió. So yo esperaba que el hecho que ella tiene demencia y Alzheimer's, que iban a tratar a robarla.
So this is where I feared the worst, that this person who had so graciously and selflessly offered to take my grandmother in was instead going to exploit her. Not just exploit her vulnerability over not being in the right state of mind, being a grieving mother, but again, the fact that she had dementia. I feared that they scripted, or they frame this so that my grandmother was asking for these things when it was obvious to me that no, this person and whomever they were working with, they wanted all of these possessions of my aunt and my grandmother. And keep in mind, my aunt had never been married, no children, so everything went to my grandmother. Oh, stealing candy from a baby, the perfect person to manipulate and exploit. And my grandmother barely speaks English, so this person would hand her, I feared, some document, make up whatever story that they wanted to as far as what it was that she was signing, and the poor thing, my grandmother wouldn't know what it is that she's signing away.
Eso fue cuando yo empecé mi batalla legal a tratar de protegerla y seguir justicia por ella.
O sea,
So yeah, right from the rip, right when any suspicions that I could have had were confirmed back in December 28th of 2020 when I received that call, that video chat. That's when I began what was a very lengthy journey to get custody of my grandmother, fight for her legally, and begin this, what I didn't realize at the time would be a more than 5-year journey to seek justice for my grandmother.
tú notaste ese cambio, ese fue el inicio que empezaste a sospechar que algo no estaba bien. Cuando te pidieron, cuando hablaron de las llaves, que hablaron de las tarjetas, ¿qué otras cosas notaste que prendieron esa luz, esa alarma?
So he goes on to mention that I had noticed the request from my grandmother, allegedly, that she wanted all of these documents of my aunt, and this is what signaled alarm bells in my ears. And he goes on to ask what else was asked for, what else did I find strange about this situation.
Pues la persona que me llamó con mi abuela dijo que ella estaba supuestamente pidiendo estas cosas por días y días. Yo encontré eso raro porque me llamaron a mí el 28 de diciembre en el año 2020. El diciembre 28 yo estaba en casa de él con mi abuela por la Navidad, 3 días anterior. No había ninguna pregunta ni de él ni de mi abuela por esos detalles. So yo encontré eso bien raro. Y otra vez, la Navidad, tiempo por la familia, ni 4 semanas pasó en ese punto desde que mi tía murió. Eso no sería la mentalidad de mi abuela, preocuparse de manejar un carro. Ella fue handicapped, ella
nunca
pudo.
manejaba.
No.
So yeah, here is where I just found this suspicious because, again, it wasn't just that my grandmother was preoccupied with these things that she would not be focused on, having been uprooted from Arizona back to Jersey, lost her only daughter. But so days and days, that was something that was repeated in this video chat, that days and days that she's been asking for these documents of my aunts that I possessed. Okay, days and days. As I mentioned in this interview, this phone call took place December 28th of 2020. I was at this person's house with my grandmother on Christmas, 3 days prior. There was no mention of, hey, do you by chance have these things with the credit cards and house keys? And I mentioned my grandmother is asking for car keys. My grandmother's handicapped. At that point, she hadn't driven a car in, I believe, half a decade. The last time she lived in Bayonne, I distinctly remember in Christmas of 2016, I drove my grandmother back home. That was 4 years before this entire debacle started. So now she's worried about keys to a car back in Arizona that she's not going to drive. Like, all of this stunk. So, and I saw it for what it was. I couldn't prove it at the time. Please believe that 5 years of fighting, I have the evidence that I need now.
Bueno, entonces dinos en tu perspectiva de lo que ha pasado, ¿qué deben observar las familias latinas específicamente en cuando un adulto mayor podría estar siendo explotado? ¿Qué deben de observar en tu experiencia?
So he goes on to ask me, in my experience, what should Latin families, and if we're being honest, any family, what is it that they should keep an eye out? What can be potential red flags if a elder family member is being exploited?
En mi experiencia, primeramente notar si ellos tienen Alzheimer's o demencia, si actúan afuera de carácter. Eso puede ser algo que demuestra que tiene demencia. Se ponen bravos sin razón a veces. So, al empezar al principio, uno tiene que notar si ellos tienen ese problema mental.
So I say, let's start at the beginning. You have to be able to tell, and this obviously it takes obviously trusting a member of your family to attend neurologist and physician checkups with a member of your family who is up there in age. Just for the record, I looked this up after this interview. The average age where dementia sets in is 65, which is alarming because the age of retirement is typically 67. But around, I don't know, give it a 5 to 10 year radius. Around that time, for anyone interested, be the person who's present with a member of your family who's getting up there in age. Attend doctor visits with them, neurologist visits with them, because at that age they really should be attending those important visits, doctor visits with someone. But in terms of whether or not a member of your family has something like early stage dementia, if they're forgetful, if they can't recall things that happened recently, if they have mood swings, like aggressive, even violent mood swings, that can be a symptom or a sign of dementia. So it's important to watch out for these types of early warning signals and symptoms.
Después de eso, la familia que se puede confiar tiene que asegurar que tiene alguien a servir como guardián legalmente. Es importante que sacan los documentos legalmente y hablar con ese miembro de la familia que está, uno al anciano que tiene ese problema mental. Hacer preguntas, asegurar que todo está bien con ellos, y la familia debe de tomar o escoger un guardián, alguien que es responsable, alguien que se va a preocupar de ir a cualquier cita del doctor. So, todo eso se tiene que tomar en cuenta.
So again, it's important to have a younger member of the family that will attend doctor visits, appointments with an elder member of your family. It's important, if possible. I realize that families aren't the easiest structure for everyone to get along, but there should be a meeting with immediate family, if not a larger portion of those that are responsible, those who genuinely care, are not looking for a payday, members of a family who have a proven track record of being responsible. And look, it's not always easy, because it could be the case that you have a family of your own, you have kids of your own. So, but it is important to have someone who attends these appointments, these doctor visits, visit a member of your family who's getting up there in age, for there to be some kind of family meeting to discuss who can serve as the power of attorney, the legal guardian for a member of this family, or a member of the family to serve as the guardian or power of attorney for this elder member of the family. So I realize that time isn't always on everybody's side, but for someone who's going through this now, it's important to take these steps ahead of time so it doesn't become a problem down the road.
No solamente su salud mental, pero también financiera.
Y esa persona tiene que ser dentro de la familia o puede ser una persona appointed by the court si no hay tanta gente, tanta familia alrededor de la persona que queremos ayudar.
So I mentioned that it's important to, and look, once someone gets up there in age, you're talking about taking care of them physically, potentially financially, worrying about their mental state of mind and their emotional state. My grandmother suffers from depression, so it's a lot. I understand that full well. Diego here goes on to ask if it has to be a member of the family, can it be someone outside of the family that is selected as the power of attorney or guardian? Could it be someone court appointed? Now, obviously, my response is going to be something along the lines of, ideally, it can be a member of the family, and it's unfortunate that you're never really safe. Like, you never have a person that's one size fits all. Well, don't pick someone who is just a relative. Pick one of the children of the elder person. Unfortunately, we all know that there are people who are opportunistic. But anyway, like, there's no one size fits all as far as who can serve as guardian. And like I mentioned in my response, and that I'll repeat here, it is important that it's someone responsible, because what is the point of giving something as important as power of attorney or guardianship to someone who's just isn't going to be present, isn't going to look after this elder like they really should? So if all other options are available and there's someone outside of the family who is trustworthy, by all means, but just as long as there is some protection, some measure of legality to all this. And that's another thing that I mentioned. Make sure that it isn't just understood around other members of the family. Oh, such and such person, they're the responsible one. We picked him to be the guardian. Right, but do they have the paperwork for that? That's what's important, because my aunt was my grandmother's legal guardian, but without paperwork, without a last will and testament for my aunt, everything went to my grandmother. And without my aunt, who was the guardian, was the power of attorney, we see the situation that I'm in now.
Sí, si no hay un miembro de la familia, porque hay miembros de la familia que pueden tener su propia familia. So, tomando todo eso responsabilidad puede ser duro y demasiado solamente por una persona. So, si necesitan alguien court appointed afuera de la familia, eso puede ser, el último recurso. Pero la primera prioridad debe de ser alguien adentro de la familia. Alguien que ha probado a ser responsable.
So very quickly, I'll just summarize. The first priority should be that it is someone within the family. The last resort is that it's someone outside of the family. But regardless, the common thread is that they need to be responsible in their own life, responsible enough to care for this elder.
Ok, actualmente estás trabajando con un abogado especializado en abuso de adultos mayores. Sí. Sin entrar en mucho detalle que puedan afectar tu caso, ¿qué es lo que están intentando recuperar para tu abuela?
So he mentions that I am working with an attorney. So without getting into too many details, what are my objectives with this case and with working with a lawyer?
El dinero que fue robado de ella y cualquier consecuencia legal que alguien que comete elder financial abuse, abuso financiero de los ancianos, que ellos reciben la consecuencia que viene con ese crimen.
So plain and simple, what is it that I'm after with this case? For the money that was stolen from my grandmother to be returned, and for those who are culpable for elder financial abuse be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That the crime for which they committed, this manipulation, this theft, that they be forced to whatever legal ramifications that there are, civil and criminally, that they be forced to endure those penalties.
Wow. ¿Cuál ha sido la parte más difícil de esta lucha para ti y tu familia?
He asks, what has been the hardest part of all of this for myself and for my family?
Manteniendo fe que se puede pelear y ganar. El equilibrio de cuidar a mi abuela, pelear por ella, porque los dos son bien difíciles. Ella tiene varios problemas física, mental. So, tomando fe que todo esto va a llegar a una conclusión. Y la razón que yo estoy aquí, tratando de alcanzar gente que tienen una plataforma o que pueden alcanzar a varias gente para que la gente le importa esto, que ellos demuestran que esto es algo importante. So, eso porque yo tengo tanto gratitud por la plataforma que tú me has dado hoy.
So, in answering the question, what has been the hardest part of this? 5 years. More than 5 years now, I've been at this, in the thick of this, in the trenches. What has been the hardest part? Keeping faith, keeping the fight going, believing that this case can be fought and won. The equilibrium of taking care of my grandmother and fighting for her, and just getting people to care. I'm just at the point where, unfortunately, I have to ask for support just because I have been carrying this wagon, dragging this train for so long, and just getting people to prioritize this, getting people to listen, to take this seriously. I don't like that I'm in the position that I need to ask people for money and donations. I wish this wasn't the case, but getting people to listen to me, getting people to realize that this is a problem, and if I can be unselfish for a moment, I have to believe that there are other people who suffered this, other people who have been confronted with a matter where there's a death in the family. And unfortunately, while there are people wiping tears from their eyes, there are other people rubbing their hands together. And I got to believe that there are other people that have endured this. But all of this, these three things have been the hardest part of this. Keeping the faith, to keep the fight going, taking care of my grandmother while fighting for her. And this latest stage, just getting people to listen and take this seriously. Not just ignore this, not assume that this is no big deal and just move on to other matters.
Gracias, gracias. Entonces lo escuchamos a Gabriel Cordero en esta necesidad. Mis amigos que están en las redes sociales, vamos a tener el contacto de Gabriel. Cualquier persona que vea un interés en ayudar esta situación, Gabriel tiene un GoFundMe page para poder aportar al abogado y seguir esa batalla legal, porque no es fácil. No es fácil, estamos hablando de mucho dinero que se ha perdido por el desfalco. Más o menos, ¿cuánta cantidad estamos hablando, Gabriel?
So he mentions just how long and how hard this fight has been. And in addition to that, he makes mention of the GoFundMe page. He goes on to ask how much is at stake here, how much was stolen from my grandmother.
100,000. Ella perdió la casa el seguro de la muerte de mi tía, su Social Security que recibe mensualmente. Ha sido un caso. Y yo peleando por más de 5 años por ella.
So I mentioned the loss of my aunt's house that my grandmother inherited. I mentioned the life insurance that my grandmother received on behalf of the passing of my aunt, the monthly Social Security checks that my grandmother received, all of that taken. So it's quite a bit of money at stake. There's quite a bit of money that was stolen from my grandmother. And I'm fighting for her to recoup this money that was taken from her, just because, I mean, I hate to look at her or the passing of my aunt and, you know, apply a dollar value to it, but that money was hers, and it shouldn't be this way, that all of this is really, she loses her daughter and she loses just everything. This has just been one of the notions that has rattled around in my mind for the last half decade, and it isn't easy, and I have mulled this over in my mind endlessly, but I keep in mind that whenever I go to see her, whenever I think about her, that I can't lose this fight. She's already lost so much, so I can't.
Ya lo escuchan, se ha perdido miles y miles y miles de dólares porque no hubo una forma de estar preparados. Y Gabriel en este momento está luchando para poder recuperar esos fondos que se han perdido de la abuela, que todavía ella también necesita en este momento.
Sí.
Yeah, so he mentions the tens of thousands of dollars that have been taken from my grandmother. And please believe, in these last 5 years, these trials aren't cheap. As much as has been taken from my grandmother, I've had to, and I'm not trying to make this about me, but as much money as my grandmother has been stolen, there have been tens of thousands of dollars that I have spent to fight for justice for her. And I believe this is the point where he goes on to mention that it's important to get your affairs in order, because you do not want any of this pain. You don't want to go through what I went through.
¿Cómo te puede ayudar además la gente que está escuchando y que va a ver este mensaje? ¿Cómo te pueden ayudar además de estar en la GoFund page?
Uh-huh.
¿Qué puede hacer la gente? Mensajes de apoyo, no sé, ¿qué has pensado además de eso?
So he asks, in addition to the GoFundMe, which would have contributions and support, what else can others do to assist and lend any kind of consolation, any type of support that they can?
Más de eso, compartir la historia de ustedes. Me imagino que la historia mía no es especial. Me imagino que ha visto otras circunstancias que familia observaron que algo estaba ocurriendo, pero no tuvo el dinero, los recursos a pelear. Si hay en la comunidad hispana, si hay abogados que pueden dar su consejo legal para que si otro tiene que enfrentar una situación como esto, tienen algún punto de empezar o alguna dirección a ir.
Muy bien.
So I mentioned, how can other people help in addition to financial support and contributions through donations through the GoFundMe? Give your story. That's one thing, one takeaway of all of this that I was hoping down the line to be able to foster, is that this story that I'm going through, that other people can have a platform to share their story, because as I mentioned there, I gotta believe that as soul crushing as all of this has been for me, I gotta believe that I'm not special and that there have been other people. Maybe you're listening to this right now and you've had to deal with this. You've had situations in your own family, unfortunately, where there have been matters where someone exploits a death or they go through illegal means for ill-gotten gains. So, and if there are any lawyers who have dealt with this, if they could give some kind of counsel, some kind of advice, so at the very least that people either have a starting block, a point where they can begin their legal battle, or know what the direction it is that they need to go down in order to make the right moves and take the right steps.
Bien, muy bien. ¿Qué mensaje quieres compartir con las familias sobre la importancia de proteger a los adultos mayores?
So he asks me what advice I would give to families in order to protect vulnerable members of their bloodline, relatives who might be in a vulnerable state, and what input I can give after everything that I've been through.
Toma mucho responsabilidad, no solo físicamente, pero mental, por el anciano y los miembros de la familia que están ayudando. Vale la pena porque en este mundo, en esta generación, algo como familia debe de ser algo que uno está peleando por. Tiene que existir un causa para que uno va a sacrificar y pelear, y menos que Dios, yo no puedo imaginar un mejor causa que eso.
So I mentioned that I understand full well the cost involved. None of this is easy. Even if what happened to my grandmother didn't, and I was allowed to take care of her after my aunt passed away the way that I wanted to, her needs are many. This taking care of the elderly, it takes an emotional toll, a physical toll, financial, psychological. I gotta believe that it's worth it, though. You know what I mean? And as I mentioned, I have to believe that God and family, and I don't care how hokey that sounds. I don't care if people don't believe in either. In this generation, in this life, some things have to matter. Some things have to be sacred. There have to be some things that people care about. So that's what I go on to mention. Don't lose hope. Be about something. Be willing to fight for something. Make something in your life a priority, not just the type of car you have, the type of clothes you wear. Family has to matter, and it can't be speeches, and it can't be empty promises. You got to be about something, especially as a man. You have to be willing to fight and have something worthwhile that defines you. And believe me, this has been the fight of my life, that so impactful that someone else's life, at the very least their livelihood, hangs in the balance.
Algo muy importante que los latinos, la comunidad latina debe de entender, que me estabas mencionando antes de la entrevista. Dinos, ¿qué es algo que la comunidad latina debe de saber?
So he and I had a conversation before the start of the podcast, and he mentioned that within the Latin community, there is something very key, something that ought to be cherished. And he asks me to provide that insight here and now.
Pues el testamento de alguien. Uno piensa que como se dice en inglés, last will and testament, el testamento, que eso es para uno mismo. No. Y es bien fácil, cuando uno está renovando su licencia o pasaporte. Esas son cosas que tienen urgencia, pero no, el testamento es para la familia, es para la generación después de ti, para que no tienen problema. Y problema lo cual yo estoy enfrentando ahora.
Bueno,
So, people, when it comes to their last will and testament, and that's the document that had this been in place with my aunt, I wouldn't be going through all this. But I'm not blaming her because she wasn't even 55, and before COVID, she believed that there was plenty of life left to live. However, as I mentioned, the age where dementia typically sets in is 65. If you have a family, you have something to protect. And, when you renew your license or your passport, these are things for you. And you mentally, you would feel as though, well, your a last will and testament, that's not only something down the line, you're still thinking that's something for you. It isn't. By the time that document comes into effect, you'll be gone. And I think not a lot of people acknowledge that. So that's what I was expressing. That's what I was trying to get across. If all of this has taught me one thing, it isn't just the importance of family. You got to have your ducks in a row. And something like this, something like a last will and testament, it's not for you. A last will and testament is not for the person who's writing it. It's for whomever it is that they want to pass on their lineage, their heritage to.
hemos escuchado a Gabriel Cordero. ¿De qué parte estás trabajando? ¿En qué parte estás? ¿En qué parte vives de New Jersey?
In North Jersey, in Richfield Park.
Estamos hablando de Richfield Park, las familias, eso es Passaic County, ¿no es cierto?
Bergen.
Oh, Bergen County. Estamos hablando de Bergen County, latinos. Sé que en Bergen County hay bastantes organizaciones de latinos que podemos apoyar, aprender y educar a la comunidad, a la misma vez apoyar a Gabriel y educar a la comunidad, porque muchas de las personas no se preparan y están y al fin del día sufren este tipo de situación. Muchas gracias, Gabriel, por estar con nosotros.
So he ends the video asking where I'm from, where I live. I mentioned Ridgefield Park. And again, he reiterates the points that I just touched on, the importance of getting your documents, your records in order when it comes to your estate, your last will and testament. And I just have to say that if you have a family, you have something to protect. I do hope that this video gives enlightenment and education for those who were kind enough to lend their time to listen. I hope that this has been informative. I hope that you'll take steps in your life, with your family, in order to protect them. The link for the GoFundMe is in the description. I'm very grateful for anyone who can contribute. I realize that it's tax season at the time of this recording. I realize that, hey, times are tough and it's not easy for anybody. I'm very grateful for those who have supported already. A huge shout out to those who have been kind enough to lend their support. On behalf of obviously me, on behalf of my grandmother, on behalf of my aunt, I cannot thank you enough. I hope that this struggle that I've gone through has made those who know me proud of me. I hope that this doesn't happen to anybody and that people learn from this lesson and take precaution. And I just ask, donate if you can. Distribute this as a must. And don't forget Lizette.